Welcome to Landmarks, the podcast where we explore the journey of living for God. In today's episode, we sit down with Sister Bri Moreno from Faith Mountain Pentecostal Church in Lakeside, California. Sister Bri faced a difficult childhood, growing up in challenging circumstances that shaped her view of life. But God completely transformed her heart, leading her into a life she never expected, one filled with love, purpose, and blessings beyond what she could have imagined. Well, praise the Lord, everyone, and welcome back to another episode here on the Landmarks podcast. We're excited and thankful that you decided to tune in to today's episode. We hope that the episodes that have been coming out have been a blessing to you, and you have been encouraged by the different testimonies and stories of God's goodness. And today we have a very special guest, a very good friend of my wife and I, her and her husband. We are great friends, peers. They have been great examples to us. We have Sister Bri Moreno from our local church, Faith Mountain Pentecostal Church. Sister Bri, thank you for coming on to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. And I always think of Bri as kind of like a long lost cousin. I don't want to say the cousin I never had because she just reminds me of different cousins and family members of mine. We have not the same exact upbringing, but similar upbringings, and just thankful for what God has done in her life and in my life, and we've been able to connect, and our families are well acquainted with each other, and we're thankful for them. And Sister Bri, we just want you to kind of follow the theme of the podcast, and that is just have a conversation with those that are listening with me here, and tell of your story, hitting on landmark moments of when God has just shown himself real to you over the years, and you can go back as far as you want to go back, and include as many details as you want to include, and leave out as much as you want to leave out. But ultimately, we just want to know your journey, your story, and how did you end up where you're at today?
Okay. Well, I am one of 5 children. I have 3 sisters and 1 brother. We were raised here locally in San Diego, and when I was about 3 years old, my mom and dad started doing drugs. So they kind of took off. They were in and out. And when I was 3, my grandpa came to our apartment in El Cajon and came and picked me up and said, "Mija, you're going to come live with us." So me and my 2 older sisters, we lived with my grandparents until I was about 5 or 6 years old. And then my dad was completely out of the picture. And I would go with my mom. I lived with my mom a lot. We would live in different motels or like RVs or people's houses. So that's what I did for many, many years. My sisters and my brother lived with my grandparents, but I just always wanted to be with my mom. And that's kind of just how my childhood was. Very chaotic, lots of different people coming in and out of our lives, and, experiencing lots of things that kids my age probably shouldn't have experienced. Don't want to really go into detail, but we can fast forward to as I began to become a teenager. I was very angry. I was angry at my mom. I think for a little bit I was angry at my grandma, even though she was just, trying to raise me and keep me away from my mom. And I remember being, I don't know what it was. I think maybe 12 or 13 years old. I remember I met my dad for the first time since I was 3.
Wow.
For as long as I could remember him. And I remember he showed up at a baseball game. And I thought, wow, this is it. Like, we're going to have at least a dad, we're going to have a dad. And cause let me rephrase that. I had a dad. My grandpa was always my dad. I never felt fatherless because I had my grandpa. He was always there. And so was my grandma. It was just, I didn't want a mom. I had a mom and nobody was going to take her place kind of thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I remember thinking, wow, like I'm going to have my dad, my dad's going to be in the picture. Maybe we'll go live with him. Maybe, and that was short-lived. We saw him once, and then I think the next time I saw him, I was like 17.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyways, that kind of left me very angry, and I started to get like super suicidal. Like I just did not want to live. I didn't want to do anything. And I was a terrible teenager to my grandparents. I put them through the ringer. They're always getting calls and always,
man,
I was a terrible teenager.
Really went for it.
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
And I remember there was as a teenager, I think every teenager goes through like a gothic stage.
Yeah.
It's just like a really dark stage.
9th grade, 10th grade.
Mine was like 6th or 7th. And I just, nobody could tell me what to do. And, my grandma, she was trying to keep me at home and it just wasn't going to happen. So I moved back with my mom. And I remember we lived in a hotel here. It was off the 8, I think El Cajon Boulevard. And I was sitting in a hotel room as a young teenager and my mom had left and she's like, I'll be back. And she left some money on the counter and I thought, oh, okay, I'll see her in a couple of days. Because she would leave for days at a time.
Yeah.
And I would be in the hotel room and I would just, I'd just cut myself and, try and find things in my mom's hotel room that I could take to try and, end my life. And it just would not happen. No matter what I tried, it just would not happen. And I really tried. And I remember my mom had said I had to go back to my grandma's house. And I was not happy about it. But I had to go back to my grandma's house because her boyfriend at the time didn't get along with me.
Oh.
So I remember going back to my grandma's house, and me and my grandma had a really rough relationship. We had a really rough relationship. We did not get along at all. And it was my fault that we didn't get along, and my grandma was like, you need to shape up or you're going to have to leave. And I thought, where am I going to leave at 13 years old?
Yeah.
And I did. And she sent me to live with my Aunt Celia. And I lived with my Aunt Celia and my cousins. And that was a rough time. That's where I started like getting high with my cousin. And we would, go sneak in the garage in the back. And when his parents were sleeping, we'd go, sneak out and get high together. And that's where I really started to like, and it wasn't any, like, it was marijuana.
Yeah.
It wasn't like any hardcore drugs. And I remember talking to my mom on the phone and she was like, you can come live with us. And I was like, okay. So we went back and we were living in a hotel. And I remember she was with the guy, and I remember he was taking us to Burger King, and he wasn't nice. He wasn't nice to me. He liked to hit, and he just wasn't nice. And whether my mom was aware of it or not, he just wasn't nice. And I remember we had gone to Burger King, and a cop pulled us over. And he had drugs on him, some pills. And he was like, here, you need to take these before the cop comes to the window. And I was like, I don't know how to swallow pills. And he was like, take them now. And he had me take all his pills. And I remember just like passing out in the front seat. Excuse me. I remember passing out in the front seat, and I woke up and I was in my at that point we had an apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And my bed was in the living room. And I remember waking up in the living room, and I was so sick. I stayed in the bathroom for days, just throwing up and so sick. And he told me, you better not tell your mom. Don't tell your mom this has happened to you. And I didn't, because I was afraid he was going to hit me.
Yeah.
And I remember it was New Year's Eve, and he had told me to go take the trash out. And we lived in like some ghetto apartment complex. And I went in through the trash, and I came back, and he didn't let me back inside the house. And he was in the room with my mom getting high, and he would not let me back in the house.
And how old were you at this time?
I was like 12 or 13.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was super short when I was growing up, so I looked even younger. Yeah. It's like smaller. And so I remember thinking, like, it's super cold out here. I have no shoes on. I'm in my pajamas.
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to do? It's New Year's Eve. I know my grandpa's at the casino. How am I going to, And I tried not to, like, my grandparents didn't know what was going on. They didn't know anything I was going through when I lived with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And the neighbor came down and gave me the phone, and I was able to call my grandpa. And my grandpa, I remember, he came and he took me home with him, and I stayed home with him for a couple months. Then my mom went to jail, and then I was living at my grandparents' house, and I was in middle school at this point, and I got kicked out of my middle school that I was in, and I had to go to like another school that was still within the district, but it had to be it was like a 6-week probation where you had to go to another school for 6 weeks, and if you survived, then you get to go back to your original school.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, like, this is crazy. Like, I cannot go to this school. Like,
the probation one?
Yeah. And it was a public school still. But one, I don't like talking to people or like meeting new people.
Or being the new girl.
Oh, exactly. And I already knew, like, I'm already so angry. If I'm not going to behave here, I'm not going to behave there.
Yeah.
And I remember having to go to that school, and I like fought my grandma about it. And she was just like, you're going to that school. Cause it was either go to that school or you had to go to, juvenile hall. And I didn't want to go to juvenile hall.
Yeah.
And so I went to that school, and I remember it'd been a couple days, and I, was not happy at that school. And I was, in class one day, and that's where I met Eddie Valdez. And we sat together in math. He actually reminded me of exactly what class that was, because I texted him today, like, are you okay if I use your name? And
yeah.
He was like, yeah, it was so-and-so's class.
That's funny.
We sat next to each other. Yeah. And so I met Eddie, and at the time, Eddie was involved in gangs.
Yeah.
And I wasn't in a gang, but after Eddie introduced me to them, like, those were the people I just
naturally gravitated to.
Yes. Like,
yep.
Before I met Eddie and went to that school, I was just an angry, snob, 14-year-old girl that just wanted to die.
Broken home.
Yes.
Ready.
Yeah. And I met Eddie, and he introduced me to all his friends. And that's kind of like, I stayed there, and then like the week before my 6 weeks was going to end, I got in a fight and got kicked out.
Oh.
So I went back to my old school, and I got in a fight there and got kicked out of the district.
Man.
So I remember my grandpa, like, he was like, I'm sorry, mija, you're going to have to go live with Celia. And I was like, because I was going to have to live in Spring Valley and go to a whole new school district.
Oh, I see, yeah.
And so I did that. I went, and I was in the 8th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And I still kept in contact with Eddie and all his friends he introduced me to, and hanging around them. I wasn't like going and doing anything illegal. I was drinking and smoking,
Right.
but I wasn't like breaking into places
Robbing
and, you know,
people.
right. And I would just go hang out with them, and we'd go to kickbacks and, you know, things like that.
That's such an old school term.
And so even though I had and I really felt like those people were my friends. Like, I was close to a couple of the girls,
right,
and a couple of the guys, and I, you know, even though I had surrounded myself with people who I thought, like, man, these are my people.
mm-hmm.
Like, I was closer to them than I was to my family, because I was not close to my siblings growing up. I was with my brother. My brother was like my baby. Yeah, I was my brother's mom growing up. So I was very close to my brother growing up. But I wasn't close to my sisters at all. So we didn't have that relationship like I had with these girls.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed in contact with Eddie. And I stayed in contact with all the friends that we were with and the girls we were with. And I'd go and party with them on the weekends and hang out with them on the weekends. My grandma let me come over on the weekends. But I had to stay with my Aunt Celia during the week. And then I was in eighth grade there, and 2 weeks before graduation, I got kicked out.
Of the Spring Valley School.
Of the Spring Valley School. So, I didn't know how to tell my aunt and my uncle at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I remember my aunt's husband at the time, he had bought me a graduation dress and shoes and took me to get my nails done. And I knew the whole time I'd been kicked out of school already.
Oh, man.
I just didn't have the heart to tell him.
Yeah.
And so it was the day before the graduation that I told him I got kicked out. And he was like, what? Like, he was not happy with me.
I bet.
And so I would go to church, but I never went to like an apostolic or a Pentecostal church. I did grow up going to like a Christian church, and I had a youth leader. His name was Big Tim, who was like a second dad to me. Like, I can't tell you how many times he's saved me, and I'll talk about him more in a little bit. But I remember my uncle told me I had to go to church with his mom, and I thought, what in the world? Well, it was a Spanish apostolic church.
Oh, wow.
And I remember walking in, and my cousin Chino was with me, and we went to church, and we went to their youth thing they had during church, and then we had church. And I remember like experiencing like the apostolic church for the first time, and it was something I'd never experienced, even though my mom and dad grew up in the Spanish apostolic church. Like, my mom, she was the choir director, and like she had tapes made. People would buy her tapes, and
really,
yeah,
wow.
My dad's dad was a pastor, an apostolic pastor. So, but I had never. I mean, I don't remember going to church like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember going to that church with my cousin and his grandma, and we were we were sitting in the pews, and it was time for altar call. And I remember the grandma like grabbed me up there and like put me on my knees, and she was like trying to get me to pray, but it was like all Spanish.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was like my first experience in an apostolic church, or like hearing someone like talk in tongues.
Yeah.
And then after that was over, I went back, and my mom had gotten an apartment, and she said that I could go and live with her. And I was like, oh, cool, great. And then the school district was like, okay, we can try high school. You can come to high school here.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, great. You know,
fresh start.
Yeah. And the apartment was like literally on the same street as a high school. So my mom thought like, okay, maybe she'll do, you know, because my mom went through phases where she was clean for a little bit, and then she wasn't. And I remember I would go to school, and then I'd come home, and there was a time that I was going home, and my mom always was like, lock the door and don't open the door to anyone you don't know, because, you know, she was in drugs, and
people knew where you guys
Yeah.
lived and whatnot.
And I remember I was in the house and someone had knocked on our door, and I had opened it, but we had it was like a little chain that goes on the top of the door so it doesn't open all the way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd opened the door, even though she had said, don't open the door if I'm not home. And it was some guy that she owed money to or something. And he was like, I'll sit inside and I'll wait for your mom. And I was like, no, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And so he grabbed my arm. And I was like trying to pull my arm back.
Through the door?
Through the door. Yeah, through the little gap. And I thought to myself, like, this man's going to kill me. He's going to get in here and he's going to kill me.
Yeah. And
so I tried like pulling my arm out, and he grabbed the doorknob and started like slamming my arm in the door to try to get me to. And I ended up getting free of him, and he left. So I called Big Tim, and he was, like I said, my old youth pastor from like just a regular Christian church. And I told him what happened, and he was like, you need to move. Like, you shouldn't stay here. You need to go to your grandma's house. Like, and after that, it like really put me in like a really depressive state because I didn't want to leave my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Because even though I knew there was nothing I could do to protect my mom, just seeing her and knowing that she was okay or she was alive or like that was good enough for me. So I didn't listen to him. And I was 14 at the time, and we were back at the apartment, and I remember my mom and her friend running upstairs. And I thought, why are they running inside the house?
Mm-hmm.
And my mom was like, here, hide this. The police are coming in. And I was like, what do you mean, hide it? And she was like, here, hide it. And she just, hid it with me.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, walk down the street to Taco Bell and I'll meet you there. And I was like, oh my goodness. And so I remember the cops got there, and they searched my backpack. They asked me if I had anything on me, and I was like, no, I don't. And the cop had known us, and he was like, you need to get to your grandma's house.
Wow.
And I was like, ugh. And
another
so,
one.
Seriously. And so I went to the Taco Bell. It was right down the street, and I remember my mom meeting me there, and all she was worried about was getting the drugs that she had me hide for her.
Mm-hmm.
And that had been the last time I'd seen my mom, probably for a while, because shortly after that, they found her and they put her in prison.
Wow.
And at this time, I was still hanging out with the people Eddie introduced me to. But I had heard that Eddie was no longer a part of the gang.
Mm-hmm.
So I hadn't talked to Eddie in a long time. And I remember my youth leader, Tim, was like, after he found that out, what my mom had done, because she didn't come back to the apartment after that. So I was at the apartment with one of my sisters and her boyfriend. And we stayed there until Tim was like, I don't care anymore. We're packing your stuff up and you're going home to your grandma.
Man.
So I went to go live with my grandma. But again, I caused nothing but trouble for my grandma. So my grandma sent me to live with my aunt, Celia, and my uncle Sean. And they had just moved up to Moreno Valley.
Yeah. Oh, Brother Sean told me about when he moved up there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought, Moreno Valley? And my grandpa was like, and me and my grandpa, we were very close growing up. Like he called me his shopping partner, his shorty. Like,
yeah.
Me and my grandpa were stuck like glue. He was like, Mija, you have to, because you're getting in too much trouble here. Mm-hmm. And I remember feeling like betrayed.
Yeah.
Like, I can't believe he's sending me here,
Yeah.
And I would sit in that room, and I had my own room, and, my Uncle Sean tried to treat me so good. He took me and bought me a bed. He got me a desk and a computer. Like, he was trying, and she was trying, and it just, when you grow up and it's not your mom and dad, it's not the same. Like, nothing can replace that, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Whether they're good parents or not.
Right.
And so I remember I would just be in the room and I would just cry and cry, like,
wow.
And I believed that there was a God, but I never had a relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just lay in bed and I would be cutting myself, and God, just please let me die. Just please let me die. Like, Why is it so easy for people to kill themselves? And like, I'm doing all
so
the
much
right
trouble.
things.
Yeah.
And I remember, I still lived in Moreno Valley, and I had a dream. And in my dream, I saw this church.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never seen this church before. I'd never seen this area before.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember walking up, like there was a wall, and we parked at the wall, and I walked out, and you walk up, like almost like a handicap thing.
Mm-hmm.
You walk up, and I remember opening these glass doors, and I walked into the church, and I was standing there, but it was just like the foyer still. I could see the church, but I was in a foyer. And I remember just like being in that church in my dream and just feeling like, whoa, like so much peace.
Yeah.
And I had no idea where I was at. And just like the peace I had felt in my dream, I had never felt before, ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I woke up and, that was that. Well, a couple months later, my cousin Brittany calls me and she's like, hey, do you remember Eddie? And I was like, oh, yeah, the guy that, left the gang. And yeah, what about him? And she was like, he's looking for you. And I was like, for what? Because at this point, I kind of started losing contact with the people he had introduced me to because I was so far away.
Yeah, yeah.
And I said, for what? And he's like, he wants to invite you to church. And I was like, I'm not going to church. He's like, well, he says he wants to invite you to church. Here's his number. Call him.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. So I was like, well, I'm going to be at my grandma's house. Sadia and Sean had to go out of town for something like farther than where they were at. And they didn't want to leave me by myself in Moreno Valley. So I was at my grandma's house. And it was, I think it was a Monday night or Tuesday night. And I called Eddie. And Eddie was like, hey, Bri, like, I want you to go to this church. Come to this church. Mm-hmm. And I was like, all right, I'll go. And I had told my grandma about it because he had talked to Sister Gracie. And my grandma, Sister Gracie grew up going to my grandma's house when she was little.
Oh, wow.
Like my mom and Sister Gracie grew up together.
Wow.
And so my grandma, my grandma had been familiar with the Apostolic Church, but she wasn't in that church anymore. And so I told her about like, hey, my friend's inviting me to this church. Do you want to go? Mm-hmm. My grandma's like, yeah, let's go. And so we're driving there and Eddie's like, it's in Lakeside. And I'm like, Lakeside? Where is Lakeside? Yeah. And my grandma's like, oh, it's, if you're driving up going towards the casino.
Yes.
And I was like, what? And so Sister Gracie's like, I'll meet you at your grandma's house and you can follow me to church. And I have no idea who Sister Gracie is.
Yeah. This was over the phone? Or?
This is over the phone, yeah, because Eddie had given me her number.
Right.
Or I don't remember. Either he gave her my number or I don't know. We talked on the phone after that. Mm-hmm. And Sister Gracie was like, Brianna, I really feel like God's calling you. And I thought to myself, who is this lady? Like, I don't even know who this lady is.
Yeah. Tracy.
Yeah. And she's like, you're going to love it. I have a daughter named Cynthia and she'll sit with you in church. And I thought to myself, I don't want any friends.
Yeah.
Like, I love being by myself. Like, I don't do the whole, especially like girlfriends. I don't do girlfriends. Like,
yeah.
That's just how it was at that age. And so Sister Gracie comes to our house and she's driving this big old gold Expedition. And so we're following her. And my grandma had walked out and she was wearing a skirt. And I'm like, Grandma, what are you wearing? She goes, oh, mija, you can't go to that church in pants. And I'm like, Grandma, I'm wearing sweats and slippers.
Yeah.
Like I was wearing a big old hoodie and sweats and slippers. And Sister Gracie's like, it's okay, mija, come as you are.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my goodness. So we get there and as we pull up.
And you stayed in your sweats and slippers?
Yeah, I had nothing else. That's all I owned.
Yeah.
We pull up to this church and I was like, this place looks so familiar. Mm-hmm. But I knew I had never been to Lakeside. Like, yeah. I thought when they told me Lakeside, I thought we were going for like a 30, 40-minute drive.
Yeah.
We pull up to this church and I was like, I've been to this church before. but I just couldn't put my finger on it.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandma's like, no, we've never been to this church before. She's like, you must be dreaming, mija. And I was like, whoa, I think this is a church I saw in my dream.
Yeah.
And so we walk up because we had parked on like where the handicap area is, you know, at the old church where we're over there. And I remember walking up and we walked into the church.
The ramp.
Yes.
Yep.
We walked into the church and Sister Gracie opens up and she's like excited for me to be there. And, you know, she's ready for me to get inside. And I walk into the foyer and I was like, this is the church in my dreams. Wow. And so I asked Sister Gracie, does this church have a commercial? And she was like, what? And I was like, you know how churches have commercials on TV? And she was like, no. Because, I mean, how else would I have seen this church?
Yeah.
She was, no. And I was like, okay. She kind of looked at me like, you know? So we get there and I remember walking in and I saw Cruz's sister and I did not like her.
Oh, wow.
Like, we were supposed to fight.
Like, just from...
Yes. Like
from being connected outside of the church?
Yeah. Well, she from high school.
Oh, I got you.
My people didn't like her people kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we were supposed to fight.
Right.
And I remember thinking to myself, oh, no. Take me home.
This ain't gonna work.
Yeah. I said, Sister Gracie, this ain't gonna work. Just take me home. I need to go home. And Cynthia's like, no, it's okay. Come sit with me. And I'm like, no, this isn't gonna work. You know, like, this isn't gonna work. And all these girls start coming up to me. And I remember Bri coming up to me, and Bri was like over the top, like, hi. And I thought to myself, oh no, like,
they're crazy.
I really thought that. And Christina came up to me, and Sister Bertram came up to me, and then Chantel came up to me, and Chantel gave me a big old hug. And I thought, why are you touching me right now?
Yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, like, what am I doing? Sister Grace is just sitting there with a big old smile on her face. Like
I told you.
She's just watching me, you know? And Cynthia's like, just sit with me. You're fine. Nothing's going to happen. I was like, I'm not scared. I don't want to be disrespectful in church, you know? And so we had church, and then it was altar call. And Brother Booker was there. And I remember him like, we all know Brother Booker, and he's God, God, God. And he just stares up. And I remember just like, what? You know? And so then I remember, like, I know I had, okay, I'm going to backtrack a couple years. I used to watch Benny Hinn at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
I used to watch Benny Hinn at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I remember one morning I woke up. Sorry, I have to backtrack to get to this point.
Yep.
I remember watching Benny Hinn at like 5 in the morning, and I had a double ear infection. I'm not playing. I had a double ear infection, and I was laying down on the floor, and I was crying because my ears were hurting so bad.
The worst ear infections.
No, and it was a double ear infection.
Oh, man.
And I remember I'm watching the show. I'm sorry, I should not laugh at this. And Benny Hinn was like, if you need a miracle or a healing in your life, close your eyes and ask God for your healing. And I was like, God. And I was so desperate at this point because, remember, I didn't have a relationship with God. It was kind of just one of those, like, I'm angry at you for not letting me die kind of relationships. And I was like, God, please touch my ears. They hurt so bad. And I was crying because my ears were hurting. And he was like, someone in this world has an ear infection, and God's going to heal them right now. I promise you, my ears popped. And I remember jumping up and running down the hallway to my grandparents because it freaked me out.
And this really happened?
I promise you, my ears did not hurt anymore. Like, my ears, I kid you not. My ears did not hurt. And then my grandma was like, see, there is a God. You need to believe in him. Mija, you need to talk to him. And, you know, I know. I promise you.
Wow.
So anyways, we're at the church. I'm visiting.
Yep.
And all I remember is when someone comes up to you and prays for you, you fall.
Oh, okay. Let's clarify that. The Benny Hinn guy. The Benny Hinn people, yes. Yeah, that's the TV evangelist guy that
yes.
if he taps his finger on their
You
shoulder,
fall.
they would like
Yes.
just fall down. Yeah, I
Right.
got you. Okay.
So I thought that's what I was supposed to do. So that's what I did. And after that, Sister Gracie was like super excited about.
You were slayed in the spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she wanted me to come back to the church. And I remember like I cried. Like when they were praying for me, I cried.
Sure.
You know, because I felt something.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sold on it.
Right.
You know, I thought, oh, maybe I just, because at this point my mom was in prison.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, oh, maybe I'm just feeling it because I miss my mom.
Yeah.
Maybe something, you know?
Right. Right.
And I remember Cynthia had asked me for my phone number and I was kind of like, you know?
Yeah.
I gave her my number and Sister Gracie had my number and Eddie had my number. And they wanted me to come back to church and visit again. So I would, you know, come here and there and because I was living in Moreno Valley. And then at some point I got the Holy Ghost and I was sold.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I can do this.
Can't deny the Holy Ghost.
Yes. But I'm not wearing a skirt. And I remember I would tell Brother Joe all the time, I'm not wearing a skirt. And Brother Joe's like, it'll come. Like, you know, God will put it in your heart. And, you know, and I was like, yeah, okay. I ain't wearing a skirt.
Yeah.
You know, I'll come to church, but on my terms.
Right.
And I remember telling my mom, she had called and I told her about church. And she was happy and she was like, I'm going to go to church too. And, you know, so then I had told Sean and Celia about it. And at this point, we moved back to Spring Valley. I don't know what happened with Sean's job, but we had moved back to Spring Valley. And Sean worked and Celia worked. And my grandparents weren't going to drive to Spring Valley to take me to Lakeside.
Right.
Well, at that time, Abel, before he was married, Abel Martinez lived on the very next street from Celia and Sean.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And Sister Gracie had set it up because he lived in Spring Valley. So Abel would pick me up for church, take me to youth night, take me to go eat, drop me off, you know?
Yeah.
And Abel would really start to talk to me about, like, you know, Bible studies and why we believe what we believe, why we dress the way we dress. And I thought to myself, man, this guy's crazy too.
Yeah.
I'm not wearing a skirt.
The topic came up again.
You know, but he wasn't, nobody ever pushed it. It was just like trying to help me understand it. So anyways, I would go to youth night and I'd come home and get high with my cousin. So I had 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Yeah.
Probably for the first year. And then I moved back in with my grandma because I really wanted to, like, you know, because there was times where he wasn't able to take me. And at this point I really wanted to, like,
go.
Yeah, because it felt good. You know? The suicide feelings somewhat went away. You know, there'd be times where I'd fight with my grandma and I'd want to die.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I moved back in with my grandma and I just went all in. Started wearing skirts. Stopped talking to all my friends. Literally, I cut off all my friends because I knew I had to.
Yeah.
Just at that time for myself. I cut off all my friends and I just fully committed to church. I fully committed to church. I was in the youth group. You know, I was always at the Pennison's house.
And how old were you at this point?
16. I came to church at 15, but fully committed at 16.
16, sold out.
Yeah. I even invited my old youth pastor.
Big Tim?
Yeah. And he came and him and his family came. And I remember I was ready to get baptized. I'd never been baptized before because, like, I knew God, but I didn't have a relationship with him. But I always knew, like, a baptism was, like, a big thing.
Yeah.
You know? And so I got baptized. My little sister was in church. My little brother was in church. And Grandma was coming to church. And we were all, you know, living for God.
God was moving.
Yep. I mean, things at home didn't change very much. But I had the church,
Right.
you know, and the church was always there for me, you know. I found relationships like, because again, I never felt fatherless, but pastor just totally took me under his wing, and he was my dad.
Yeah.
You know, like there's a time that he's like, I'm going to tell you no, but I'm going to tell you like I'm your dad. And I thought, whoa. But, you know, like it felt good to like have that authority.
Sure.
You know, and Brother Joe, he like, because I went through it.
Mm-hmm.
As a teenager, I went through it. And Brother Joe was always picking me up at the house.
Just in times of need and
yes.
times of...
And Sister Gracie would come pick me up. And, you know, I'd spend the night with Cynthia. Like, I was always at the Pennison's house. Always at the Pennison's house. They taught me what fasting was. And, you know, they were just, as a teenager, they were my anchor.
Yeah.
Like, they were who I held on to. They were who, you know, they were who kept me in the church. You know,
man, they're special. The Pennisons. They've. I can say similar things about them. You know, in my early years, and different ones that have come onto the podcast have said the same thing.
Yeah, for JoJo, it was never too early. It was never too late to call him.
That's awesome.
You know, like one time, me and my grandma had gotten into it, and I was like, I'm done with this church. Like, and it wasn't even the church's fault.
Yeah,
you know, I was just being a brat, and I put pants on. And I threw the skirt away, and my grandma called JoJo, and he was right there. Him and Jonathan came, and I thought, oh, no, this is so embarrassing.
Yeah, full rebellion.
You know, and Jonathan was looking at me like, what are you doing? You know, and JoJo took me outside, and they talked to me, and, you know, and as I got older, Brother Omar took me under his wing, and he was... you know, always, he had hurt himself, so I'd take him home. Mm-hmm. And those times we'd have, you know, conversations, and he would always tell me how proud he was of me, you know, and like how he knew how hard it was to grow up like that and still, you know, be in church. And he was always really good to me, and my in-laws too. I ended up, you know, becoming friends with my sister-in-law that I didn't like in the beginning.
Yeah.
And, you know, my in-laws took me in and had me, you know, I was always at their house. This was before I liked my husband.
Yeah.
And then, you know, me and Cruz started liking each other. Mm-hmm. And we dated for some time. And one thing that I always knew was I didn't want to be a mom. I really didn't want to be married either. Mm-hmm. Growing up, I did not want to be a mom. Like, I never played like mom or I want kids or, you know. And so I thought, I don't know if he's going to want to marry someone who doesn't want to be a mom.
Is that because you didn't want to, like, I guess, follow in the same footsteps as your mom, or just the hardness of life just kind of took away the desire to want to be a mom?
I think that, and like the hardness of life. And I just remembered, you know, all the things that I won't get into that's happened to me scares me that it would happen to my kids.
Right.
And I thought, I'm not going to know how to love a child. Like, you know, my grandma tried to be my mom, and I never had that motherly love from my mom.
Yeah.
So how am I going to show that to another child? You know, like I loved my brother, and I was like my brother's mom, but I wasn't his mom.
Yeah.
And so I was settled on, hopefully I'll find someone who needs a mom, or has been through what I've been through, and I can be there for them. So me and Cruz get married, and I ended up getting pregnant with Isaac. And I remember being so scared. Like, I'd be up at night and I would cry, like, how am I going to love this little boy? You know?
Yeah.
And Isaac was born. And after Isaac was born, I got really, really sick. I had a C-section with Isaac. And I think this was a time where like I had been in church for years since, I had Isaac when I was 24. I had been in church since I was 16, but I had never experienced God in this way that I'm about to explain.
Yeah.
So after having Isaac, I ended up in the ICU, and I ended up, I was in septic shock, and I had E. coli in my bloodstream, and I had pneumonia, and I was super sick.
Yeah.
And so I remember Isaac had to be with my mother-in-law and my sister Nisa, and Isaac was jaundice, so he was going every day to get poked. And I'm sitting in the ICU, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Oh.
And he's only, 4 days old? 4 days old, and Cruz is with me because he doesn't want to leave me. And I remember I got, like, so depressed. I mean, like, I think women, after they have babies, they already go through, like, the baby
emotional
blues.
swing. And,
right.
Yeah.
And, like, I hadn't even gotten home with him. Like, his first night at home was with my mother-in-law.
Wow.
And his first, like, outfit change at home was, like, little things like that.
Sure.
And I would stay up at night, and it got me, like, super, super depressed. And I remember I was laying in a hospital room, and I've never been one to, like, I love God and I love church, but I've just never been very, like, loud about it, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not that person that just, like, I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
I don't like scream when I'm praying. I just, and maybe it's just I don't know. But I remember one night I was looking out the window, and I thought, I wonder how hard I have to hit this window to fall out of it. And we were up, like,
this is why you're in the hospital room?
After, like, I'm in the ICU or critical care at this point. And, the doctors were like, you have to be here for a couple more days. And I thought, like, my baby, I want to be with my baby. And Cruz was asleep on the couch. And I thought, if I hit this window hard enough, I bet it'll break and I'll fall out of it. And I thought, like, I remember when I first had Isaac, in my mind, I didn't say it out loud, but I was like, I promise I'm never going to leave you. And before I got, like, when I was in the emergency room and doctors were running all around, like, at this point, they didn't know what was wrong with me. Sorry, I'm going back a little bit.
Yeah.
And I remember looking over at the doctor and asking the doctor, am I going to die? And she was like, no, well, I don't know. I hope not. And I thought, like, I just promised my son I was never going to leave him, And so I'm laying in bed, and all of a sudden I just sit up and I just start screaming. I can't. Like, God, why are you doing this? Like, even though clearly it wasn't God. And Cruz jumps out of bed, and he's like, what's wrong? And I was like, I can't. Like, I was having a breakdown. And I remember, like, I was, like, desperate for God to, like, more desperate than I'd ever been in my life, And I got to go home, but the baby blues didn't go away. And I think a part of me was, like, angry at God for letting that happen, even though, looking back, obviously it's not God's fault. It happened.
Yeah.
And my husband didn't know. Nobody knew, but I always thought, like, I could just drive off this bridge. I was really going through it. And I was driving to work one day, and it had been probably, like, 5 months since it had happened. And God had healed me. Like, the doctor had said I was going to have some heart issues. And after I got out of the hospital, he said people with that, I don't remember what it's called. People with what I went through have heart issues. And they had like, when I got home, they put this, like, machine to like stickers. I had to walk around with this, like, pack.
Oh, wow.
And the doctor's like, I don't know how your heart's healthy, but it's fine. And I was, I was fine. Like, God had totally healed me.
Yeah.
I was fine. Well, I remember one day I was on my way to work, and I remember thinking, like, I don't know what's going on. Like, I just want to die. And again, nobody knew. I didn't tell anyone my thoughts or what I was going through. I remember just sitting in the car, and I was in traffic. I was in stop traffic. I remember I just, like, I was so angry, just so angry at everybody, everything, just life. I was just so angry at life. And I remember, I heard God speak to me. Don't forget how bad you needed me, how desperately you needed me.
Mm-hmm.
And right there in traffic, I just like broke down and just,
Wow.
And after that, it took me a while to tell Cruz about it. But after that, I feel like it's changed me. It's changed when things get hard and,
It was like God reminding you in a firm way, it seems like, but also in a way like reminding you that I'm always here.
Right.
I won't leave you.
Right. And, I'm thankful it happened in that way because I don't feel like I would have been able to get past that without that.
Mm-hmm.
And, I talked about before about maybe, not wanting to be a mom, but maybe one day I'll meet someone who needs us, Well, then Judah was on the way.
Yeah.
Judah was on the way, and 10 days before Judah, we got a call from CPS, and CPS was like, your nephews are being taken away. Do you want them? And me and Cruz were like, we can't have all three of them. So the boys were split up and we got Eric 10 days before Judah was born. Yeah. Eric was 8 years old. And, we used to talk about it before we had Isaac, like, maybe Eric, maybe one day we can get Eric. And I used to pray for Eric, like for God to give us Eric.
Yeah.
Well, then when I got pregnant with Isaac, that prayer kind of went away.
Sure.
But then we got Eric. And now we have Eric and Isaac and Judah. And, I'm just thankful that I have everything I thought I didn't want.
Yeah.
God has given me a lot. And, growing up and going through what we went through and experiencing the things that I experienced, I didn't think that this would be my life.
Yeah.
And it is. And I love it. I'm thankful for it.
That's so powerful. And God is so good like that. It really kind of shows you things that, like you said, thought you never knew. And from an outsider looking in, from a friend in church, you're a great mom. The boys are always in the cleanest little suits, all three of them, and they're all super cool kids. We all love them, and it's just awesome to see, knowing the story a little bit more now, seeing, because I've only just seen you since I've been in church, which is like, not too long ago, but I never knew the details like that. And what a good God we serve, and so thankful that you came and shared your heart, and thankful that Brother Cruz was able to sit in here with us. We're going to have him on the next episode, maybe. He's nodding his head no, but anyways, we're man, thanks for that, Bri. That was awesome, and God is so good, and so thankful for the landmark moments in our life where God shows himself real and really just fills the gap, the void that we're unable to fill ourselves. And appreciate you again for coming on and doing this. And for all of our guests and all of our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope that this story was a reminder to you that God can work in any situation, and he's still moving even when you don't know it or feel it. He's working for you, in your favor. Thank you again for all the support, for those who tuned in today. We hope it was a blessing and encouragement. And remember, you can subscribe to Landmarks on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Thank you again, and we'll see you on the next one.